In 2006, a team of scientists did something that had never been attempted before. They collected DNA from every wild cat species on the planet, all 37 of them, from the Siberian tiger patrolling frozen forests to the black-footed cat in the Kalahari Desert, from the snow leopard moving silently across Himalayan ridges to the flat-headed cat sitting motionless in the rivers of Borneo. Every cat species still alive on Earth. They sequenced their genomes, compared the data, and published the results in the journal Science. The lead researcher was a geneticist named Warren Johnson, working alongside Stephen O'Brien at the National Cancer Institute's Laboratory of Genomic Diversity. And when the broader scientific community read what that data showed, the first reaction in many cases was genuine disbelief, because the family tree that emerged from the DNA looked almost nothing like what a century of biological science had assumed it would. Before this study, the way scientists grouped cats was built almost entirely on physical appearance. Big cats together, medium cats somewhere in the middle, small cats at the bottom. The logic seemed reasonable on the surface. The lion, the tiger, the leopard, and the jaguar were all enormous, all capable of roaring, so they went into one group. The cheetah had spots like a leopard and hunted across open African savanna like a lion, so it sat somewhere near the big cats in most classifications. The clouded leopard had spots and was a decent size, too large for the small cats and too unusual for the big cats, so researchers placed it in an awkward middle ground. That physical approach had held for over 100 years. Then the DNA came in and dismantled it completely, not piece by piece, all at once. The 2006 Johnson study presented a phylogenetic analysis for all living cat species, derived from autosomal, X-linked, Y-linked, and mitochondrial gene segments covering 22 789 base pairs, with 16 fossil calibrations, defining 8 principal lineages produced through at least 10 intercontinental migrations facilitated by sea level fluctuations, 8 branches, 8 distinct evolutionary lines, and almost none of them fell where anyone expected. The tool that made this possible was something called a molecular clock. The principle behind it is straightforward but powerful. DNA mutates at a predictable rate over time, and by measuring the accumulated differences between two species' genomes, researchers can estimate with considerable accuracy how long ago those two species shared a common ancestor. It is not a perfect instrument, but it is dramatically more reliable than looking at an animal's coat pattern and making an educated guess. And what it revealed about the cat family rewrote one of the most studied animal groups in all of biology. Take the cheetah. It is one of the most recognizable animals alive. It lives in Africa, the same continent as lions and leopards. It has spots, the same defining feature of the leopard. It hunts by chasing prey across open grassland at extraordinary speed. The same terrain lions dominate on the Serengeti. For decades, taxonomists placed it alongside or near the big cats. And some researchers specifically proposed a close relationship with the leopard based on coat similarity alone. The DNA said no. Unambiguously, the cheetah sits in the puma lineage, descended from ancestors that migrated to North America from Asia following the first ice age between 8 and 10 million years ago, with the puma lineage arising around 6.7 million years ago. The cheetah's closest living relatives are the cougar, known in North America as the mountain lion or puma, and the jaguarundi, a small otter-faced cat that lives in the scrublands and forests of Central and South America. The cheetah is not a big cat. It never was. The spots, the African habitat, the open country hunting style, none of that reflects shared ancestry with lions or leopards. It reflects a completely separate evolutionary path that independently arrived at superficially similar results. Biologists have a precise term for that process: convergent evolution, when two unrelated species independently develop the same feature because they are solving the same survival problem in the same kind of environment. The cheetah and the leopard both evolved spots, but they did it separately, millions of years apart, on entirely different branches of the tree. The cheetah and the lion both became African predators, but their lineages had already been diverging for millions of years before either of them arrived on that continent. And the cheetah's speed, the feature that defines it above all others, the ability to accelerate to over 70 miles per hour in pursuit of prey, evolved entirely within the puma lineage. It has nothing to do with the lion's raw power or the leopard's explosive agility. Those traits came from different trees entirely, which raises a question the data confirms, but does not fully explain. Why did this one branch of the family, the puma lineage, produce the fastest land animal that has ever lived? The genetic record does not give us a complete answer, but it does make one thing absolutely clear. The speed belongs to a different family than anyone thought. Then there is the clouded leopard, and the clouded leopard's story is even stranger. All cats share a common ancestor that likely lived in Asia around 10 to 12 million years ago. And over the past 10 to 11 million years, the Felidae family experienced rapid expansion and diversification. Within that timeline, the clouded leopard represents something genuinely ancient. Before the Johnson study, it occupied an awkward middle position in cat taxonomy, too different from the true big cats to belong there, too large and too unusual for the small cat groupings. It had the longest canine teeth relative to skull size of any living cat, a feature that put it closer to the ancient saber-toothed cats in that one physical trait alone, and researchers used that as a rough guide for placement. The DNA confirmed that the clouded leopard is not awkwardly positioned. It is genuinely, almost incomprehensibly old. Its lineage separated from the rest of the cat family roughly 6 to 8 million years ago, making it the most ancient surviving branch among all living cats. In genetic terms, a clouded leopard in the forests of Borneo is more distantly related to a tiger in Siberia than that tiger is to your house cat. The clouded leopard has been running its own separate evolutionary program for longer than almost any other cat alive on Earth today. And in 2007, just 1 year after the Johnson study reshaped the field, researchers discovered something that made the clouded leopard story even more remarkable. In March 2007, researchers analyzing museum specimens and fresh DNA samples from clouded leopards across Southeast Asia announced a finding that stunned the conservation biology world. Genetic research results clearly indicated that the clouded leopards of Borneo and Sumatra should be considered a separate species entirely, with DNA tests highlighting around 40 differences between the island population and their mainland cousins. The World Wildlife Fund confirmed the announcement. DNA analysis found that the genetic distance between clouded leopards from Borneo and Sumatra and their mainland relatives was as significant as the distance between lions and tigers, and on that basis, the island population was formally declared a new species, named the Sunda clouded leopard. Think about what that means for a moment. An entirely new species of cat, the apex predator of one of the most visited island chains on Earth, had been sitting in plain sight for centuries. People had been traveling to Borneo and Sumatra for generations. Naturalists had cataloged these animals, written about them, displayed their skins in museums across Europe and North America. And not a single person had formally recognized that the cat on the island was not the same animal as the cat on the mainland. It took a DNA comparison to make that visible. One genetic study had reorganized the entire cat family tree. A follow-up study found an entirely new species hiding inside a group researchers already thought they understood, and the DNA was just getting started. The genetic distinction between the mainland clouded leopard and the Sunda clouded leopard was supported by 41 fixed mitochondrial nucleotide differences and non-overlapping allele sizes in 8 of 18 microsatellite loci, a level of divergence equivalent to the genetic distance among recognized species within the Panthera genus itself. That is not a marginal difference. That is not a subspecies distinction achieved through careful squinting at data. That is the same order of genetic separation that exists between a lion and a leopard. Two animals that every person on Earth would immediately recognize as entirely different creatures. The Sunda clouded leopard had been classified as the same animal as its mainland relative for the entire history of modern taxonomy. One careful genetic comparison ended that misclassification permanently. Researchers believe the Sunda clouded leopard was separated from the mainland Asian population by a massive volcanic eruption around 75,000 years ago, with the long geographic isolation eventually producing an animal distinct enough to warrant full species recognition. 75,000 years of separate evolution, and the only tool sharp enough to detect it was the genome itself. Now here is where the picture expands from surprising into genuinely disorienting. Because the Johnson study was not simply mapping who was related to whom, it was mapping when and where each lineage first appeared on Earth, using the molecular clock to timestamp every branch of the family tree. And what that clock revealed about the geographic origin of the entire cat family was something that cut directly against one of the most deeply held assumptions in popular natural history. All cats share a common ancestor that lived in Asia around 10 to 12 million years ago, and fluctuating sea levels during this period created land bridges that allowed successive waves of cat ancestors to migrate outward to other continents. Asia, not Africa. The continent that most people instinctively picture when they think about cats, the Serengeti with its lions and cheetahs and leopards, the continent that feels like the center of the cat world, was not where any of this began. The origin point of every cat alive today, from the Bengal tiger to the Canadian lynx to the sand cat in the Sahara to the margay in the Amazon rainforest, traces back to a single ancestral population in Asia, living in a world that looked almost nothing like the one those species inhabit now. From that Asian origin point, cats spread outward in successive waves, each migration time to moments when sea levels dropped low enough to expose land connections between continents that no longer exist. The oldest cat lineage is the Panthera lineage, which split from the common ancestor approximately 10.8 million years ago, with descendants evolving into species that migrated across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas over time. The ancestor of the big cats crossed into Africa and Europe around 6 to 7 million years ago. Then came the caracal lineage, crossing land bridges at what is now the Red Sea into Africa around 8.5 million years ago. The puma lineage arose around 6.7 million years ago, after ancestors crossed from Asia into North America via the Bering Land Bridge, with the puma and jaguarundi later spreading south into South America across the Panama Land Bridge, while the cheetah migrated back into Eurasia and ultimately into Africa. That detail alone deserves a moment of genuine pause. The cheetah, the animal most associated with the African savanna, is not originally African at all. Its lineage originated in North America, it crossed back into Asia, and then pushed south into Africa. Arriving on a continent its distant ancestors had left millions of years before. The Africa that most people picture as the birthplace of the cat is actually a destination, reached by multiple separate lineages, traveling from Asia across land connections that the rising seas eventually swallowed. The Americas themselves present one of the most dramatic chapters in this entire story. Around 9 million years ago, descendants of the panther-like ancestor of all modern cats began migrating from Asia to North America, when unusually low sea levels created land bridges across the Bering Strait, and the Western Hemisphere had no cats at all before that first crossing. The entire New World, the jungles of the Amazon, the pampas of Argentina, the forests of the Pacific coast from Alaska to Patagonia, was completely cat-free for the first half of the cat family's existence. And then the first wave arrived from Asia, and from that single migration event, every cat that has ever lived in the Americas descended. The jaguar, the ocelot, the margay, the puma, the jaguarundi, the bobcat, the Canadian lynx, every one of them from one group of animals that crossed a land connection that has since vanished beneath the Pacific. If that crossing had not happened, the entire Western Hemisphere would have no native cat lineage at all. The continent's entire feline diversity, from the largest jaguar in the Pantanal to the smallest cudcod in the Chilean forests, exists because of a single migration event across a land bridge that the ocean erased millions of years ago. Once the geographic story settled into place, researchers turned to something that had been sitting inside the data the entire time, waiting to be properly examined: the genetic health of individual species. And what they found when they looked closely at specific populations was not just surprising. In some cases, it was deeply individuals from different populations across Africa and Asia. They found something that had no real parallel in the rest of the cat family. Cheetah genomes are on average 95% homozygous, compared to 24% in the outbred domestic cat, meaning the level of genetic sameness across individual cheetahs is extraordinary even by the standards of known inbred populations. To put that in terms that land immediately, consider what researchers documented as far back as the 1980s. A cheetah skin graft study conducted on 14 unrelated and related specimens showed an extremely low level of rejection, with only 3 rejections after a period of 50 or more days, results that had previously only been observed in inbred laboratory mice and identical twins. Graft a piece of skin from one wild cheetah onto a completely unrelated wild cheetah, and the recipient's immune system will not reject it, not because the animals are related, because they are so genetically similar that the immune system cannot tell the difference. Every cheetah alive today reads as a near-identical twin to every other cheetah, at the biological level, where the body makes its most fundamental decisions about self and non-self. The practical consequences of this extend far beyond the laboratory curiosity of skin grafts. The genetic uniformity of modern cheetahs is linked to poor sperm quality, heightened vulnerability to disease outbreaks, and diversity that continues eroding even in populations where total animal counts appear stable. A pathogen that kills one cheetah moves through an entire population with almost no resistance, because there is essentially no genetic variation to slow it down. The immune systems of all individuals respond identically to the same threats, meaning a single virus can sweep through a cheetah population the way fire moves through dry grass. Cheetahs retain only 0.1 to 4% of the overall genetic variation seen in most living species, a level of depletion lower than Tasmanian devils, Virunga mountain gorillas, Amur tigers, and even highly inbred domestic cat and dog. So what caused it? The second and more severe bottleneck event occurred approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the end of the last ice age, when the wild cheetahs of North America and Europe went extinct entirely, and the Asian and African populations were reduced to an extremely small founding group through extreme inbreeding. This was the same mass extinction event that erased the woolly mammoth, the giant ground sloth, the cave lion, and the American horse from the fossil record. The cheetah survived that extinction, but only just. And the survival came at a cost the species has never stopped paying. Even though cheetah numbers recovered to as many as 100,000 individuals during the 19th century, the genetic variability lost during the bottleneck could not be reversed because genetic diversity once lost cannot be rebuilt simply by increasing population size. The number of animals recovered, the genome did not. And today, with perhaps 7,000 cheetahs remaining in the wild according to current IUCN estimates, the species is losing what little genetic diversity it still holds. And the North American puma population collapsed entirely. The animals that had roamed Yellowstone, the Rocky Mountains, the eastern forests, and the Florida wetlands for millions of years were wiped out along with the mammoths and the American horses and the giant ground sloths. North America lost its pumas. What the genetic data then revealed was that the pumas living across North America today, every mountain lion in Yellowstone, every cougar in the Santa Ana Mountains, every Florida panther in the Everglades, are not the descendants of those original North American animals. They are the descendants of South American pumas that migrated back north after the original population disappeared, slowly reclaiming the entire continent over several thousand years. North America did not keep its pumas. It borrowed new ones from the south. And nobody knew that until the DNA arrived and made it impossible to argue otherwise. African lions carry a version of the same story. Genetic surveys of lion populations, stretching from West Africa to South Africa, reveal that lions across their entire continental range are far more genetically similar to each other than the geographic distances involved would logically suggest. Demographic analysis points to ancestral population bottlenecks in the lion's past as well, events that sharply reduced genetic diversity and left a founding group that subsequently spread back across the continent as environmental conditions improved. The lions that exist today are not the product of a stable, ancient, continuously thriving African population. They are the survivors of collapses that left almost no trace in the fossil record, and that only the genome preserves in any readable form. The Serengeti, which looks to any observer like the unbroken continuation of a primordial African wilderness, is actually populated by the descendants of animals that came close to disappearing entirely, rebuilt from a genetic bottleneck that the bones in the ground cannot show and that only the DNA can tell. There is one more finding buried inside the Johnson study that tends to land differently from everything else. It is not about migration routes or extinction events or population collapses. It is about the animal most people reading this have sitting somewhere in their house right now, the domestic cat. And the reason it lands differently is because almost everything people assume about where their house cat sits on the family tree turns out to be wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally, structurally wrong, in a way that reframes what that animal actually is and where it actually came from. Most people assume the domestic cat is essentially a miniaturized version of the big cats, a scaled-down lion or leopard that traded the savanna for a sofa. The DNA places that assumption in the same category as the assumption that the cheetah was a big cat. A reasonable-sounding conclusion built entirely on appearance and entirely contradicted by the genome. The domestic cat lineage is the most recent of the 8 cat lineages, emerging around 3.4 million years ago, and its members are generally small to medium-sized cats adapted to a variety of environments across Africa, Europe, and Asia. The closest wild relatives of the domestic cat are not lions, they are not leopards, they are not tigers. The domestic cat lineage groups together with the sand cat, which survives in the Sahara and the deserts of the Middle East, the jungle cat found across South Asia, the black-footed cat of southern Africa, and the Chinese mountain cat of the Tibetan Plateau. The sand cat is an animal that lives in some of the most extreme desert conditions on Earth, hunting sidewinder snakes and surviving on almost no water in temperatures that would kill most mammals within hours. The black-footed cat weighs roughly 1.5 kilograms, making it one of the smallest wild cats in the world, and yet it is one of the most lethally effective hunters by success rate of any cat alive, catching prey on more than 60% of its attempts, a rate that no lion, no leopard, no tiger comes anywhere close to matching. The Chinese mountain cat is so poorly studied and so rarely photographed that most people who spend their lives working with wild cats have never seen one in the field. These are the animals that share the most recent common ancestry with the cat sleeping on your couch. Not the lion, not the leopard. The desert hunter and the tiny spotted killer in the phantom of the Tibetan Plateau. The leopard, the animal whose name and spotted coat make it feel intuitively like the wild ancestor of the domestic cat, separated from the domestic cat lineage somewhere between 6 and 8 million years ago. Scientists who compared DNA sequences across all 37 cat species used fossils to provide calibration dates, and the resulting tree places the Panthera lineage and the domestic cat lineage on branches that diverged in the deep past, separated by millions of years of entirely independent evolution. To give that number a reference point that makes it genuinely tangible, modern humans and chimpanzees shared a common ancestor roughly 6 million years ago. The domestic cat and the leopard have been on completely separate evolutionary branches for approximately as long as that. The leopard is not a large version of your house cat. Your house cat is not a small version of the leopard. They are related the way humans and chimpanzees are related. The shared ancestry is real, but it is ancient. And everything that happened after the split happened independently on different branches, solving different problems in different environments across millions of years. The big cat group itself produced its own set of reclassifications once the DNA came in. Before the Johnson study, the assumed relationships among the Panthera species ran roughly as follows. Lion and tiger most closely related because both are enormous and lack spots as adults. Leopard somewhere in the middle. Jaguar and snow leopard as the more distant outliers. The snow leopard was considered so distinct from the others that for decades it was placed in its own separate genus entirely, classified apart from the true big cats on the basis of its physical and behavioral differences. The Panthera. Lineage includes the lion, tiger, jaguar, leopard, and snow leopard, and the genetic data reclassified the snow leopard firmly inside this group, placing its closest relative not as the leopard despite the shared name, but as the tiger, two animals that look almost nothing alike and inhabit completely different environments. One lives at high altitude in the coldest mountain ecosystems on Earth. The other is the largest cat in the world, built for tropical and temperate forest hunting. The snow leopard and the tiger are closer genetic relatives than the snow leopard and the leopard. Two cats whose shared name implied a biological connection turned out to share little more than a word, while the actual genetic relationship existed between animals that nobody had paired together before the data arrived. The jaguar's position shifted too. Jaguars and lions are more closely related to each other than either is to the leopard, which cuts directly against intuition since lions live in Africa and jaguars live in South America, and the two animals look quite different from each other. But DNA does not care about geography or appearance. It records actual shared ancestry, and actual shared ancestry does not always align with what the animals look like or where they happen to live now. Convergent evolution keeps producing that same misdirection. Similar environments create similar-looking solutions in animals that share no recent common ancestor, and for over a century that misdirection was enough to fool the entire field of cat taxonomy. Recent molecular phylogenies propose that living cats radiated in the late Miocene period and diverged into 8 branches, and though the divergent age of these branches largely coincides with fossil evidence, the inferred origination areas of some branches are not supported by fossil records at all, which means the bones were always an incomplete guide. The fossil record captured fragments, moments, isolated specimens preserved by geological accident. The genome captured everything, every migration, every bottleneck, every split, every convergence, every crossing of a land bridge that the ocean later erased. The full history of the cat. Family was always written in the DNA. It simply required the technology and the scientific will to read it properly. What Warren Johnson's 2006 study ultimately delivered was not just a corrected family tree, it was a demonstration of how profoundly appearance can mislead even the most careful scientific observation over an extended period of time. The cheetah looked like a big cat for 100 years of taxonomy. It was never one. The snow leopard looked like an outsider among the Panthera species. It belonged there all along. The clouded leopard, eruption that cut the island population off from the mainland forever. And the animal watching you from across the room right now, the one whose ancestors humans domesticated roughly 10,000 years ago in the Near East, is not a miniature lion. It is the member of a lineage that made its own evolutionary choices, spread across its own range on its own schedule, and has been doing things its own way since long before. Anyone thought to compare the genomes and discover that almost everything assumed about its place in the family was built on nothing more reliable than the way it looks. If this made you see the animal kingdom differently, drop your thoughts in the comments below, because what DNA continues to reveal about the species sharing this planet with us is stranger and more fascinating than any assumption we started with.